I'd like to call this meeting to order. And can we start with a roll call?
Vice Chair Kamra,
Present.
Member Delgavio,
Present.
Member Taft, and Chair Lindsay and Member Middleman are noted absent, although Member Middleman is in the room as an applicant.
Now what we do is we have a call for changes to the agenda. Are there any?
There are no changes to the agenda. However, you have a number of desk items for the project at 10 Still Creek. There are various items from neighbors raising concerns about the project, as well as desk items from the applicant.
The next what we have is we're interested in public communications that are for anything not on the agenda for the seating. So anything that's not about 10 Still Creek Road. Are there any public comments? Questions?
I see no raised hands online.
Okay. And next we move on to the consent calendar.
That's correct.
Do we have anything?
I'm sorry, yes. We have two items on the consent calendar. They're the minutes of January 27th and the minutes of February 3rd. So you could, if you have no changes to the minutes, then you could take one action. If you have any changes, you could pull either of those items.
Does anyone have any changes to the last two consent items?
No changes.
Okay, I make a motion that we approve those consent items. Now we will move on.
We just need a second and a vote.
I second that vote.
I'm sorry, I missed who made the motion. I missed who made the motion.
Oh, I made the motion
Thank you.
to approve the consent calendar.
Okay, Vice Chair Kamra,
Yes.
Member Delgavio, Member Taft.
Yes.
Thank you.
And now I think we just have one item on the agenda tonight.
Yes.
Yes. So we're going to move on to the staff to present the staff report. So Sarah will present where we are to up to date us at this moment, in this project.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I'd like to reintroduce the project at 10 Still Creek Road. Surrey project includes the construction of a new main residence with an attached garage, JADU, ADU, as well as two detached ADUs that are within one structure, for a total of 3 ADUs and 1 JADU. So the ASRB reviewed the project at its January 27th hearing and made recommendations to the applicant. The applicant has since made some changes to their plans that I will go over briefly. So the ASRB recommended the following. One is to revise the location of ADUs to number 2, 3, and 4 to reduce the encroachments into the setbacks and minimize visibility from the road. They also recommended relocating or removing the carport from the roadway easement, completing additional neighborhood outreach, and working with staff to route the plans to the fire district for review. The applicant has indicated the following changes. The first is that ADU 2 was moved 4 feet further from the road to reduce the encroachment into the front setback. So that's this ADU structure here. So it's moved 4 feet further from the road. ADU number 1, which is above the garage, was revised to be a JADU, which brings the number of ADUs to 3 and 1 ADU, which is in compliance with the number of ADUs allowed for the site. The ADU number 3 and 4, which is this detached structure on the other side of the road, has been revised to be, it's a different footprint. It's further down the hill and further from the road. The carport was removed from the right-of-way. It used to be kind of in this space, and it's now not within the right-of-way easement. It's located here. There was some proposed bollard fencing that was removed from the scope of the plans and that was in response to neighbors' concerns. And this retaining wall kind of adjacent to this garage was revised to be further from the side property line, and that was a concern from the neighboring property. We did receive a number of desk items. The first sort of chunk were from letters from neighbors expressing concerns about the project and the project changes. There was also a letter from the applicant. And lastly, there was a letter from Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District with some comments and a request for biological assessment for the project. So, process-wise, given that this is the fourth hearing, second review of this iteration of the plans, staff recommends that the ASRB take one of the following actions. You can either move the item to formal design review with clear direction on project changes, if any, that should be made to achieve a project where the ASRB can find it to be consistent with the design review criteria. This would also allow the applicant to install story poles, which would assist with the review. Or the ASRB can, with the applicant's consent, can continue the conceptual design review with clear direction on the project changes in order to achieve a project that's consistent with the design review criteria. Or the ASRB can reject the conceptual plan with clear reasoning on why they are rejecting the proposal. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does the board have any questions for staff?
No immediate questions.
Just questions confirming that there still are five topics of challenge, basically I'm sorry, let me think for a second. That there are basically 5 alterations to either setbacks or height variances that the neighbors are still up in arms about. There are 5, is it still 5?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I understand your question.
Okay, so it seems.
How many like variances or what?
Yeah, variances, thank you.
Oh,
What was
sorry.
missing?
I think with a formal design review application, we can really narrow down all of the specific variances, but yeah, there are variances that we've identified. The height variance, setback variance, potentially maybe variance to work within steep slopes. But so those are like the ones that were identified. And then the maximum residence size exception. So I think that's 4.
I do have a question that just came in on the last desk item from the Mid-Peninsula Open Space. They mentioned that there was a horse trail and equestrian trail. Where does that fit into the property?
No, I don't. I think, yeah. Oh,
The equestrian trail is the road itself.
okay.
Yes.
Oh, it's road.
Answers the question.
It's correct, yes. When how it jogged my memory, it's on the parcel map that allows for equestrian easement and the emergency vehicle access.
Yeah, it was almost too obvious to think of this, but do we have a slide which shows 4 exceptions being asked for?
This is there are different exceptions. So a residence size exception is just a formula. The code says it shall be granted if they comply with the formula. So that's not, there's not a real lot of discretion in that. It's very typical. That can actually be on any house size that maybe sometimes just needs a building permit because they're adding on to the house. And then the ones that, the discretionary exceptions that we've identified thus far is there's a variance required to the height, maximum allowable heights. There's a variance to place structures within the required setbacks. And still working with the applicant, there's a possible variance for slopes, to develop slopes in excess of 35%. May recall, the town recently changed the code to allow ADUs in the steep slopes. So any of the ADUs that might go into those steep slopes, that's not on the table. So we're really talking about the main residence. And the applicant has already provided some preliminary review from a geotechnical engineer, which is what the town requires, that has identified most of these areas that are man-made and prior to being man-made, 35% or less. There's still a couple areas in question. And so need to get some follow-up information from the geotechnical engineer to determine if a variance is actually required. All of those details come with a formal design review application.
Thank you again.
Sarah, the report that the Mid-Peninsula requested on the biology biodiversity.
So
Has that been done? or-
Well, biological reports are typically done when they're identified, when a project's within a town identified environmentally sensitive area. Typically, we're dealing with stream corridors. Sometimes there's wetland areas. So this project does not develop within one of those areas, so it's not standard practice. But in some cases, you know, kind of a minor biological assessment could be done. It's something we'd have to talk to the applicant with further with the formal design review application. It's not typically required for a project on just any vacant lot.
And Sarah, I did have a question about the parking, because that seemed to be a big issue with the neighbors. Now, it seems to be that we've increased the parking the parking. Can you describe where the parking is and what's normally required? And is the applicant in excess of what's normally required? Are they asking for more? Or what would be for normal?
Sure.
Or-
So what's required is 4 spaces for the main residence. And then I believe that it's 1 space per ADU. And yeah, the JADU does not require space, so that would be 7 required.
Okay.
And it's not identified exactly on this plan where those would be, but you have the garage, which has 2 spaces, and then they have these sort of like parking areas identified here in front of the garage, as well as across here.
Well, the memo that we got from the applicant stated that there were up to 26 parking spots now on the property.
There's a sheet in the plan set that the applicant has kind of squeezed in, shown how many cars you can squeeze into the area. A couple of things that we'd clarify is that the 1 parking space noted in the road right of way on the downhill side, that's not something that the town would count as a parking space. It's just in the right of way. As well as there's 1 or 2 that hang out into the right of way itself. They're not in the roadway, just to be clear, but just it's like your driveway apron. There's a couple that kind of partially hang out to there. So, you know, this is just kind of an extreme example showing that if they had guests, that they could fit this many cars on the property. But 7 are required, and they're just showing how many they could really stack in their driveway.
Would you be able to tell us what the maximum without exception of the property home size would be versus what they're asking for?
Sure, for the maximum allowed is 6,000, and then with the residence size exception, I believe the lot size will allow up to 8,800 square. I think they're Again, we're still need to go through the formal design review application details for the actual calculations. They're probably in around the 7,900 square foot range.
If we were to reduce that size, would that help us with all the setbacks?
I think with the resident size exception, that's something that the code says it shall be granted if you meet the formula. So the point is there's not discretion there. When you're talking about the total floor area allowed for the entire property, I believe that's 5.5% of the total lot area. And that's something when you're looking at project massing, and overall total floor area, that's something that could be taken into account.
Any more questions for staff?
Yes, with my apology for a minute delay. Um, Just to confirm my understanding, um, not everyone knows about SB 9, but there's a state law which allows subdividing property and then having uh, main house and ADU on the parcel A, say, and then two ADUs on parcel B, and then the requirements for the setbacks are much less stringent than they normally are. So I just want to make sure that we all understand it's kind of the applicant's goodwill to really go through this process and not insist on SB 9 and going this route, which would leave neighbors not much space, if any, for any negotiation because it's the state law. So is my understanding correct?
So there,
By doing what the applicant is doing, it's a show of goodwill.
yeah, so there's SB 9, and then that has been recently followed up by SB 450, which has kind of loosened some of the requirements from SB 9. This project, exactly the way it's designed, wouldn't fit within that exact box. But what Member Taft said is true. I mean, it allows for 4-foot side and rear setbacks, and it allows for no discretion that buildings could be built using the objective design standards. Now, if any exceptions are allowed, it takes us off the table. So this project, the way it's currently designed, would not qualify for SB 450, but some similar, maybe close to equally large project in a different configuration possibly could go through that process.
Thank you. Thank you, Sage. So my understanding is correct then that it may be considered as a goodwill on the part of the applicant to go the kind of the established route and really solicit inputs and review it, inputs from the neighbors and go this route.
This particular project still requires the discretionary review, but
Yes.
yes, a different project potentially not required to go through this process.
One last question, Sarah, for you. I'm just looking at all these cars in the main area, not the ADU area. Is that a carport where those two red cars are? I mean, do we have not only parking spaces, but is that a covered carport as well?
That's what it's called out here. It says covered parking. We don't have the elevations for that we would need for a formal design review, as well as that would count towards the total floor area.
So the garage has two inside spots at the carport.
That's correct.
Oh, okay. All right. Any other questions for staff? Okay. At this point, we would like to call if the applicant would like to make a presentation.
Thank you for having our project in front of you. Sorry for my voice. My children bring home a lot of sickness. So I feel we've made a pretty good effort to engage neighbors. They may not share that view, but I feel like we've made a reasonable effort to reach out individually as well as to the group and have feedback given to us and worked that feedback in with the many constraints that our project and our site itself offer us. And so, we hope that, we can continue the process of hearing feedback, but we hope that we can also move forward with this project. And thank you again.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant?
No.
No. Okay, at this point, I'd like to make a motion to open for the public hearing. Do we have anyone online?
So if anyone online would like to speak, please virtually raise your hand. And then what we often do is maybe take one online and one in person and alternate that.
We had a raised hand earlier, but it's down now. So we don't have any raised hands online.
Would you like to have Jim speak as part of your presentation? Okay, sorry. So in this case, well, this will still be part of the applicant's presentation and we'll finish that first. Thank you.
Jim, did you have any comments?
I only, a couple quick ones. Can you hear me okay? Am I on? Yeah, okay. I just wanted to add, I'm available for questions, but I just wanted to add to that for ADUs 3 and 4, that building was rotated roughly 90 degrees. It was redesigned and rotated so that the narrow elevation was facing the street. I don't know if that was pointed out or not, but just wanted to make sure that was clear so that from the street, the ADUs present a narrower profile. That's all. Just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comments? Anyone else from the public that would like to make a comment?
You want to speak?
My name is Simon Klemperer. I'm a resident at number 3 Still Creek Road. I'm very appreciative of the changes that were made in this revision, moving ADU back 4 feet. That's a 4-foot gain for the neighbors. Rotating ADUs 3 and 4 is a gain. But I do think that it is still well within, it crosses over the 30-foot building setback, and it would be very easy to move it further downhill with a slightly longer driveway, so it was below the line of sight and beyond the 50-foot setback. My point is, we don't need to have these buildings intruding on the visual beauty of the scene. The second point, on the south side of the road, I really have a concern that the JADU is problematic in that the plain language of the code is that it must be entirely contained within the main residence. And yet it is closer than the 30-foot setback. So I see an issue there that although, as was pointed out, you might say there is a single request for setbacks, for setback variances. In fact, those variances apply to several of the buildings. Whether you count that as one or as many, I leave to you. Thank you.
Just a question for you, Sarah. Does the JADU meet the guidelines as being the way it was intended to be in the guidelines as, connecting to the main house? Or
It is part of the main residence, so in that intent, it meets it, yes.
The buildings are connected by an internal hallway and that it's considered part of all one structure.
Any other comments from the public?
We have a raised hand online. I believe it's Joan Men.
Yes, I would like to speak. My name is Joan Main, and I live at 7 Still Creek Road. And I am concerned about the JADU being considered fully contained within the main residence at the same point in time that the main residence now is defined as including a bedroom and bathroom over the garage. It's defined as including those because the tower is now defined as part of the main residence because it connects via a long skyway to the main dwelling. So while it may technically meet this concept of connected to the main residence, it looks to us and the architects we've consulted with that it doesn't meet the spirit of the regulations. It is an attempt to create what is being called a JADU out of what was formerly called ADU number 1. So I ask that the committee consider asking the applicant to push back this whole Skyway ADU, JADU problem and the garage, so it's clearly away from the street and connected to the main building to meet the intent of the code. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Hello, my name is Aaron Amy. Excuse me. My wife and I own the property at 45 Still Creek Road. Sorry, just wanted to quickly say, you know, the instructions that were given to the applicants at the last meeting was to quote, solicit more community outreach toward finding whatever changes are necessary to address concerns such that the next review will be in a much better state with regard to community support. We don't really feel that happened. You know, we as a community provided a list of 4 things that we felt were sort of necessary from our point of view to preserve the rural character of the neighborhood. And there was some minor, the minor thing was just rotating that one ADU building. But beyond that, the concerns have not been addressed, and we did not have an opportunity to review or discuss the new proposal with the applicants. So we feel like the feedback that we gave and the conversations that we had were not substantively taken into account with the proposal. That remains very much the same. And the slew of variances that are requested to be able to put, you know, not only larger buildings than are allowed by code, but also putting them much closer to the street would dramatically change the character of the neighborhood. That's our fundamental objection. And I certainly hope that this review board will, you know, take its role seriously and not allow the character of this neighborhood to be so dramatically changed when, as Simon said, we feel that there are plenty of opportunities to move things further back and not have such an obtrusive, gigantic development that would really just change the whole nature of this street. We all moved there because it feels like we're living in a redwood forest. You know, having suddenly, you know, 4 buildings right up against the street would really change that dramatically. And I don't think there's any reason for it, and I don't think that a sincere attempt has been made to change that. I would also say with regards to the JADU, you know, I'm not an expert in these code issues and so on, but it seems that it wasn't really changed. You know, there was maybe a change made to a door, but now they're simply not counting the bathroom and the bedroom and so on in the square footage of the JADU, whereas it would clearly be used as part of that. It's in that same building along with it. So it doesn't seem to me like that's in the spirit of a JADU, as well as the issues around the setback and whether or not it's part of the main residence. Thank you.
The next raised hand online is Royal Coprod.
Hi, pardon me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so my my concerns are mirror what Aaron just said, that irrespective of the technical compliance or not with some of the some of the code issues, the overall size of the structures and their position with respect to the road just seems to be, I don't know, a pretty major modification of the neighborhood's character. Yeah, I think the site plans look like they addressed one of the biggest concerns that I had was just the idea of overnight parking of residents. And it looks like there are enough parking spaces now available. So that one's probably adequate. I'm not sure how everyone else feels about that, but. And then just one comment for the panel. There are some occasions when we can't hear the panelists speaking because the mics are too far away from the faces or something. It's just occasionally your sound drops out. So I just wanted to request that we keep an eye on the mic
Thank you.
position. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
There are no other raised hands online.
My name is Terry Braunstein. I don't live on Still Creek. I live on Sunrise Drive, nearby, in the neighborhood. My wife served on this committee for the better part of a decade, my deceased wife. So I think I have some sense of the role of the committee. Kathleen Braunstein, I don't know if you remember her. But what you're looking at is a project which requires multiple variances, which is well within the setbacks all around, built in the middle of what was a beautiful redwood forest. Most curiously, 67 redwood trees were found to be diseased. Right. And many more will soon be found to be diseased. The fundamental purpose of this committee is to preserve the rural character of Woodside, to preserve its redwood forests. And what we see here is the exact opposite. Thank you.
Still no raised hands online.
Anyone else in the audience?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jendi Su, and I co-own the property at 45 Still Creek Road with my husband. I just want to reiterate and emphasize our desire to preserve the rural character of Still Creek Road. You know, if you ever been to our road, you see that it's very much a redwood forest, which we just love. You know, we're willing to bear with the high expenses of maintaining our property, of the inconvenient drives, because we just love the feeling of when we drive home, there's just trees, you know, and instead of apartment complexes right on the street. And it does stress me out tremendously to think about that this character will be disturbed or even completely removed with this proposed project. And also, you know, I'm a layperson. I don't understand all these variances, exceptions, and building code and whatnot. But just intuitively, you know, on a 10-acre lot, why can't you just build a long driveway like all the other neighbors are doing? You know, we are in the very hilly region. That's why all of the houses on Still Creek Road right now have really long, windy driveways. You know, our house is a very long, windy driveway, 500 feet setback away from the road. And so does Simon's house, 3 Still Creek Road. Joan and Hans's house is 7 Still Creek Road, you know, and 35 Still Creek Road doesn't have a long driveway, but it's well set back and is shielded by trees. So what we are really asking for is for a project that preserves the character of the non-obtrusiveness of our properties. And thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
We have a raised hand from Phil B.
Hi.
My name's Philip Bourgeois. I live at 100 Skywood, right at the corner of where Still Creek exits the Redwoods. And I would just like to repeat what was just stated about the rural nature and the fact that this deviates so many locations from the code. I think we have to, kind of call it here and really kind of restrict the builds to what the code allows. And that I think we all can live with. Thank you.
Thank you. Going.
No one has a raised hand online.
Okay, I have a motion to close the public hearing.
I second that.
Okay, at this point, we are going to move on to the committee discussion. Who would like to lead off with that?
Well, it's an interesting challenge. What is the right balance between what one of the neighbors wants to do for the family compound and the nature of the neighborhood and expectations of other members of that local community. All that is in the context of town's desire and the necessity to increase the number of ADUs developed. And we had a number of interesting projects or would-be projects when a large development gets lands near an existing neighborhood, and it's a multi-unit development, and people are absolutely are upset why it's them, not someone else. So part of this is, again, in terms of what's fair, what's not, is someone needs to accommodate some of it gradually. The question is how gracefully, right? So also when one thinks of changing things around and moving things away from the road, for example, there are also budget issues, cost issues, so feasibility issues. So it's probably not as easy, and I would imagine that the applicant has been working on it for quite some time. But more specifically, I believe, Sue, you mentioned 500 feet driveways. So many people have 500 feet long driveways. So is it to say that everyone has a turnaround for fire truck? And you also had to pull in fire hydrants closer to the house. So all that was done by all neighbors. Thank you for confirming this, because again, there are now pushing house, the main part of the building further away from the street. I just wonder, I saw the site. It seems to be pretty challenging to move it in, and also additional trees will have to be cut anyway. So I very much understand and sympathize with the sentiment expressed by you, Terry. But again, it's, I mean, when I see a project, when someone wants to cut 25 trees to increase the sunlight to generate more solar energy, I have got a question mark in my mind. Maybe it can be moved somewhere on the roof, perhaps with different location. Here it may be challenging. So I just wonder, with all that, do we have any representation of what actually the neighbors are suggesting? How would that look in the reality of the terrain and in the reality of that beautiful forest? How can it be moved further away and make it to make it less noticeable?
Is it possible that we put this page up on the screen, SK 13?
So those are the floor area calculations. They don't give like a extreme representation. If you're looking for a building placement, maybe good to focus on the site plans.
Sounds good.
Zoom in a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. This one just.
Well, actually, the long aisleway between the JADU and the house, that seems quite long. Can that not be moved back towards the main
Reduced?
residence?
Buildings can be placed in different locations on lots. I think what Member Taft was raising is what does that do? So there's, trade-offs. So if you push something back, does that require more grading? It likely would. You can see those black dots on the plans. Those are locations of trees. Those are the larger trees on the property. So sometimes moving in different locations could require more tree removal. Yet it could accomplish some goals of being further back from the roadway and less visibility. So there are different trade-offs when moving structures on the site. As you move back, the hill does get a little steeper.
The ADU too, now that doesn't, looks like there might be one tree there, but could
Yep.
that be moved back?
Yes, it's quite possible. Everything it needs to be engineered. If they dig it more into the hill, those techniques are available. How that changes cost and budget, that's something the applicant would need to consider, but it does, could dig more into a hillside and push buildings back.
And where on this diagram, where is the tallest point, which is the most maybe visually disturbing? And someone mentioned it looks like it's a tower. It's towering over the area. So maybe addressing that would alleviate the main concern. Where would that be?
ADU number 2 is the closest to the roadway, and it has the most building width facing the roadway in that relative distance.
What
That would
size
be
is
the
that
most.
ADU?
That ADU, it's around 1,500 square feet. It's 2 stories. We've done some preliminary looks at the floor area calculations. They will need to be adjusted a bit, and it's something that the floor area calculation is not required at conceptual review because we don't have all of the details, but yet some applicants choose to do them because they want to figure out where they are. So we've done some preliminary review. It's likely some minor alterations would be necessary to those calculations. But yes, that building, it is 2 stories, and it's a double level ADU that would be technically attached to the house.
It looks like according to this calculation, that is 1,800 plus it's got 3 decks that are approximately another 4 plus 100.
The decks may not count towards the square footage, but yes, they are square
Visible.
footage.
Can we take comments from the public?
It's up to you. You just.
Oh,
okay,
okay, for sure.
I wanted to respond to the question that Mr.
Yes,
Taft asked.
thank you.
Of the community, what would we suggest? We haven't hired an architect and engineers and so on, so obviously we don't have, the ability to present detailed plans. If that's part of the normal process, then, we could do that, but it seems that first of all, clear that there's a bunch of stuff that can be moved back from the road. And particularly, I just want to point out that what's being requested of you right now by the applicants is that you give them a variance that they specially be allowed to put all of these buildings right up to the, right close to the side of the road that they wouldn't normally be allowed to do. And it seems very clear that they're not as set back as they can be. And that makes the whole project very obtrusive. So in addition to the height, the overall size, and I think there are some questions about the acreage that should be included in the calculation for the exception there as well. But all of these things add to your being asked to give permission and a blessing to multiple different variances, all of which would ruin the character of the road. So I think the burden is not so much on us to demonstrate, a very specific plan in opposition to that, as it is, for the applicant to come forward with plans that don't require all of these variances, that would have the effect of increasing the visual impact on the neighborhood. So,
Yeah.
so perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying this. In just one thought in the back of my mind, if I might share it real quick. I mean, there is always a way, or there may be a way to change the design so that no exceptions are taken, and yet it would be still imposing on the nature of this particular parcel and the neighborhood. So that's why I hope to hear what, if there's any consensus among the neighbors, what is the most potentially disturbing or disagreeable part of this project. Because, for example, if JDU is not real JADU, I mean, it's probably not in itself, it's not a threat. But, and also it's probably hidden behind ADU number 2. But ADU number 2, as you pointed out, is the most visible and it's closer to the road. So where would be the most critical, the most disturbing, if I may use that strong word, part of the project that you can point out?
I think it's a combination of the setbacks. All across the board, there are a bunch of different things. It may be one variance that's requested, but it actually encompasses multiple buildings. Plus there's a parking spot that's in the road easement there, which would be quite visible. And the height variance that's requested, and the overall bulk. You know, the reason that we're looking at the JADU, for example, is, well, it's a separate building from the, and that makes it much more prominent, and it's larger than its stated size because, you know, certain parts of it are not being counted in the square footage. So it's just a combination of the overall size of things, and there are variances being requested for to make it bigger than it's allowed to be, and the setbacks and the prominence in the form of the height. So it's really all of those things that conspire to make this a very conspicuous and incongruous development.
So it's the overall mass of the structure
and
which
the
is
proximity.
visible. So the question is, what is the most visible part of that mass, which it's hard to see it on the plan, but with story poles and also, you know, 3D views of this, it may be easier. So perhaps that the problem can be solved this way. That's what I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the sort of simulated pictures that we see, we you know, it's pretty easy to see that the whole thing is very, very obtrusive. And what we're asking is that it be made less so. I don't think we need the story poles and so on in order to see that. But we may emphasize just how much it is. But, you know, from the parking to all the different buildings that are right nestled up to the side of the road, that's really the issue.
Thank you again.
Through the chair, we're in a ASRB discussion, but given that the applicant, I mean, the neighbors have stood up, the applicant's architect has raised their hand and might want to respond. But again, you know, trying to keep it focused on board discussion would probably be best.
Okay, one last. From the architect, it's fine.
Can I speak? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to remind everyone that the original intent and design of this building was to minimize the impact on the site by building on only the areas that were less than 35% slope. And the reason why the building is separated on the south side into 3 sections is because those are the only 3 sections that currently are less than 35% slope. And so in an effort to try to have a minimal impact on the site and the number of trees that need to be removed because of the building itself, that's the reason that this building was built like this. And it's perfectly consistent, I think, with the overall design guidelines of a building weaving through the forest and stepping up the hill, and building in the areas that are the flattest and not the steepest, and in an effort to try to maintain the integrity of the site as it sits.
Thank you.
Can I ask Jim a question? If we were to squeeze the whole thing together, so to speak, toward the center, you know what kind of grade differentiation from the 35 we're talking about?
Well, if we move ADU number 2 back any further, it's going to be in the 50% slope. So where right now we pushed it back 4 feet. When we pushed it back 4 feet, it required us to remove a healthy tree, and it's a good healthy tree. We'd prefer not to do that. Also, we are now building into the 35% slope and into the 50% slope, which is when I first started designing this, and my marching orders from Kristen and David were try to have as minimal impact on the slopes and the forest as possible. And that's the reason that this building is designed exactly the way it is to have the least impact on the site. And so if we push it back, we're going to be not only in the 35% slope, we're going to be in the 50% slope. And that is also true for pushing back the garage and ADU number 1. And by the way, the garage and the lower level of where ADU number 1 is, that is part of the main house, along with the tower and the bridge.
Is the back of the ADU structure, is that on stilts as well, or on piers of some sort?
No, the only structure that is on columns is the main residence, and that's because it sits on a bench that's partway up the slope, but it backs up to a very steep slope. And so the goal there was to allow the natural drainage to run, because the house necessarily has to be wide because the bench is relatively narrow. So in order to allow the natural drainage to run below the house, that part of the residence has been put on stilts.
Would the same thing happen to the ADU if it were turned and pushed back?
If you're talking about ADU number 2,
Yes.
well, ADU number 2 is probably, half as wide as the main residence. And so, so what our goal there was to create a swale around the house to allow, so any drainage that came off the hill, and you can see as you go further south, this site gets very, very steep. And so trying to push the main residence, let's say, back further, I think would be, very, very difficult to do. But the ADU number 2, I think, is even though it's turned, so its long axis is parallel with the street, it's still narrow enough that we can direct the drainage around both the east and west sides of it. And one of the reasons we have a bridge connecting the garage and ADU number 1 to ADU number 2 is the reason there's a bridge there, so we can direct the water around around the east side of the residence and below that bridge and collect it below.
Okay, thank you. I think at this point, it's time to close the public hearing and move on to our discussions.
And then I'll just remind everyone to speak into their microphones so for the benefit of the people on Zoom.
Commissioner Delgadillo, if you have some comments.
Well, I do think that when they purchased this property, they had to have known that there were going to be some challenges building in the redwoods. And I truly feel like the amount of variances that are being granted is, a few too many for my take on what they're trying to accomplish. And I understand the beauty of the family compound and all that you have discussed, heartfelt. It's really important and admirable. It just seems like this is taking too much of the land, generally speaking.
Well, I did have a chance to go back up this weekend with my dog. to walk the property, to get another look at the property. And I've been fortunate. I've had 3 different residences in Woodside, all on beautiful country roads, the back of Bear Gulch, Moore Road, and then currently just over here. And it is such a community experience because everyone walks this road, everyone in the community, and we meet our neighbors on the roads and the dogs, and we walk together. We're all like, hey, let's go to the hydrant. And so it does appear to me, and I went back to those spots that I've lived and I cherished, just having that wonderful sense of, you know, walking the road and talking to my neighbors and having this real sense of community. And I think when you are, particularly I felt this when I was up on the back of Bear Gulch, how important community was, because we were pretty isolated, you know, well, who's got the generator? Who do we go to for this or that? Because you are somewhat living in the woods a little bit. That I think that the neighbors have, what they're saying, it is true, that you have too much to the road. I mean, the carport, when you say something like the tower, that's a little scary. Then you have the other carport on the other side of the road that I think it's wonderful to have this multi-generational housing, but can we make it smaller? Yeah, I mean, I have a 1,400 square 2-bedroom guest house with a band room in it, and it's quite large without the decks. So I don't know. I mean, to me, I would like to see everything pushed, maybe not the main residence if you've already backed that up to the hill, but bring those other things back. And maybe you don't. If you have a garage, maybe you don't have a carport. If you know, have a couple spaces for the ADUs across the street, maybe you don't have a carport there. So I just think that more thought could be given to making this a little bit smaller and, you know, taking in the neighbors' concerns so that and now that it's a easement trail, I mean, and people have their horses, you don't want that many cars. You want to have some space and longer driveways than what I think is being presented to us tonight. So those are my thoughts.
With so many exceptions, it's difficult from the design standpoint, and maybe Jim, the architect, can say something about it.
No more.
To change
Right.
things without understanding what is the highest priority item or dimension to kind of cut back on. And without it, it's kind of all over the place. So is it the size? Is it the height? Is it the setbacks? Is it the crowded view of the parking? It sounds to me that maybe the height is probably the most visible. So if not, then I think it's up to the neighbors to come to a consensus. What is the most effective way to maybe scale down? Which dimension to scale down? That I think would be helpful. Otherwise, there'll be over considerations and changes over and over again, unless that.
I don't think we want to put this on the neighbors. I mean, they've already voiced their concerns, and I think it's quite clear. It's really the height, the mass. I think it's the size and the closeness to the road that seems to be the most offensive. So I would like to make a motion not to approve this project, to go back to your architect and see how you can scale this down, how you might be able to move this, especially ADU to the carports away from the road. I'd like to make a motion for that.
So we could look at a couple options. One is just rejecting the project, and you should be very detailed in what the reasons are for rejecting the project. The applicant, if they consent, could also agree to a continuance to address these items further. That could be another option. You can ask the applicant.
What's the difference between those two?
Having to repay fees and come back if there are specific items that you think that are okay. So, you know, we should go back a little bit and realize what comments were made at the last hearing, and has the applicant adequately addressed those comments? We didn't have any comments about the main part of the main house last time. And whereas there were comments about pushing things back further from the road, and if the ASRB determines that that wasn't adequately addressed, maybe some of the massing related to those structures. ADU number 2 has a vaulted space area. It's not necessarily walkable square footage. There's different ways that some of those buildings could be redesigned in a way that could reduce some massing. So those are specific comments that the ASRB may want to consider. I've heard comments about the carports and their proximity to the roadways, and could those either be removed or further relocated? Those are items that did come up at the last meeting, if not adequately addressed. It might be good to specifically comment on those areas. And, then it could be, what decision does the applicant want to work with at this stage, or if they decide that they don't want to make further discussions. Getting it to the formal design review is at a place where applications and projects can be approved or denied, whereas at the concept level, it's just saying this concept isn't good and needs to be totally rethought. And I don't know that we've heard that throughout the hearings for the overall project, other than the specific comments that we heard last time.
So I would make a motion, I think this is the painless one, of continuing one more round. And we're asking for a mass reduction. We're looking for a reduction of the tower. We're looking for potential removal of carports and the length of the number 8 corridor. If there's a way that we can compress the buildings to be closer together and look at how that doesn't affect the landscape as much by either rotating the building or something of that nature, working with the architect.
And I also think maybe moving ADU 2 back, and if it does have, vaulted ceilings or something, it's more the mass. What are you going to see when you're strolling down, when you're taking your horse down the driveway? What are you going to look over and see all of this? So if it could be reduced and moved.
And if there's a huge tree, is it big enough that the building, instead of being rectilinear, ended up being a U shape that incorporated the indoor-outdoor of the beauty of the tree within the design?
If I may, I think what is loud and clear in what both of my colleagues mentioned would be the visible height and mass. And that seems to be the most critical part, visible height and mass.
And reducing
Everything
the
else would
amount of
be,
setbacks
uh,
or variances that we're having.
those would be nice to have, but visible height and
It's
mass.
the visibility.
To be specific, like if there is a steep downhill and there's a massive something down there and it's not visible, I don't think it would be bothersome as much.
And
So
I don't
it's
think we
visible.
necessarily design it for them as much as we need to make it clear as to what we're suggesting, and how clear are we at this point, Sage?
What I've heard is a motion for a continuance. Reducing the tower is something we'll look at. That's for an elevator. So elevators have certain height requirements they have to meet.
Right.
But that could be looked at to bring the buildings further back from the road, specifically with ADU number 2, looking to push that back further into the hillside, as well as reducing the mass of that structure, and looking at ways that it could be reduction in the overall walls and size. It could be a combination of that with looking at the decks and how those are viewed from the roadway. I've also heard a recommendation to look at the removal of the carports, given their proximity to the road. And then again, just kind of reiterating, trying to bring those 3 different pieces of the main residence closer together, which would try to minimize the overall massive.
Reducing the size of it.
Yep.
And so that you're not asking for the mass, make
many-
it a little smaller.
Okay, so we have a motion from Member Delgado. Is there anything else that we should add, or Just to make sure we captured everything.
I think that's it.
Okay, and then is there a second?
That pretty much sums it up. A second, that motion.
I, again, in my mind, it's only the visible, right, in mass. If it's everything, I would probably abstain.
Oh, okay, just,
So do we have a second? Oh, sorry, yes.
I second.
Yes, so then we have vote.
Vice Chair Comra,
Yes.
Member Delgavio,
Yes.
Member Taft.
I abstain.
The motion passes. So the item would be continued. We will issue an action letter to the applicants and the neighbors. We'll further meet with the applicant and they can determine the next steps forward.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming and being considerate.
And good luck for both the applicant and the neighbors. It should work out to everyone's satisfaction, hopefully.
Okay, with that, we don't have any other items on our agenda. Just in terms of reports, I just do want to first off thank Member Taft. This is the last meeting. Really appreciate all the hard work you've put in. Very been dedicated. You stepped in at a time when nobody wanted to serve on the ASRB. So we really appreciate all the effort and work that you've
Thank you.
taken the
Thank
time
you.
to serve
Thank you,
for the
Sage.
town of Woodside.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Sarah and Julie.
We
yeah.
understand we have a new member?
Yes, Member Robert Sullivan, he lives in the Woodside Hills. We will have his orientation later this week.
Yeah, and I have to say that I have a lot of pressure at home for a number of things. So I did the best I can. So it worked out just fine from that perspective.
We wish you the best.
Thank you.
If anything else, you can adjourn the meeting.
They adjourn. Thank you. Oh, I miss you.
Well,
You'll go.